Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're strapping in for a high velocity journey through some pretty fractured timelines in cinema.
It's going to be a wild one.
Yeah, and if you're that listener, the thoughtful film analyst who really loves that dense intersection of narrative, theoretical science, and pure philosophy, then this deep dive is absolutely your mission brief. We're taking 5 of the most intellectually challenging films out there and using them as tools, really, to dissect the fundamental nature of time, identity, and maybe even fate itself.
And these films, they don't just use time travel as like a simple plot device. They almost weaponize it philosophically.
Right.
Our goal today is to go way beyond just summarizing the plots and instead, pull out the core intellectual concepts.
Yeah.
Things like, how do these stories redefine causality?
Yeah, what are they really teaching us about predestination?
Exactly. And where do things like moral evolution and even personal aidity fit in when the flow of time is just completely broken?
We've put together a really incredible stack of source material for this, and we're going to move methodically. We'll start with the, let's say, elegant simplicity of the time loop, that short, repeating temporal window.
And then move to the really baffling stuff.
To the mathematical complexity of unstructured time travel. We have to keep a clear distinction in mind here. The loop is a reset button.
And travel is a physical jump. A huge difference.
Indeed. These 5 films represent, I think, the absolute pinnacle of the genre's intellectual challenge.
We've got Groundhog Day, Edge of Tomorrow, Source Code,
Looper, and of course, the notoriously dense Primer.
Right. Each one forces you and the protagonist to confront reality on completely new terms.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the beginning. The blueprint, the ethical cornerstone. We have to begin with Groundhog Day from 1993.
We have to.
It's packaged as a romantic comedy, but it might be the most profound statement ever made on existential freedom.
Structurally, it's flawless, and ethically, it's essential. What's so fascinating here is that the loop itself is never explained.
Not at all.
It's a metaphysical device. It's a metaphor for arrested development. Phil Connors is trapped in his own narcissism, and the universe basically gives him an infinite sandbox where his actions have no consequence.
And that's where the film becomes just genius. Initially, he exploits that.
Of course he does.
That zero consequence environment. He commits crimes, he learns skills just for momentary gain. He even attempts suicide, countless times. He's purely hedonistic.
But none of that moves the clock forward. Nothing changes.
It's only the moment he starts using his temporal omniscience for purely altruistic reasons, saving the homeless man, genuinely connecting with Rita. That's the trigger.
Exactly. The film subtly argues that the ultimate existential cheat code is not escaping the temporal trap itself,
right,
but achieving self-transcendence within it. He isn't released because he found some technical flaw. He's released because he became the best possible version of himself.
Which sort of answers that whole question of predetermination. It shows that freedom only really exists after you've completely mastered your own moral identity.
It completely redefines what success even means.
Yeah, his success isn't saving the world, it's just becoming capable of love and genuine empathy. And you have to wonder, right, if you, the listener, had an infinite number of retries, how quickly would you get bored with purely selfish pursuits?
And pivot to becoming a master pianist or saving lives. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
It suggests that true self-improvement is the only possible way out of existential stasis. Anything less is just sophisticated clock killing.
That sets a very, very high ethical bar. But okay, we need to shift the discussion now from purely emotional and moral evolution to something more practical. To practical mastery, and crucially, the challenge to identity when the loop is based on hard scientific mechanics. We're leaving philosophy for pragmatism.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
It does.
We're moving from the metaphorical loop, where the rules are, spiritual, to loops designed for pure high-stakes outcomes. We're asking, what happens when this repetitive mechanism becomes a weapon?
Our first stop in this sci-fi shift has to be 2014's Edge of Tomorrow.
Right.
On the surface, it feels a bit like Groundhog Day with laser guns. Some critics definitely said that. But what new insight does it truly offer beyond that ethical blueprint?
Well, it offers a crucial insight into mastery and agency. Unlike Phil Connors, Major William Cage doesn't need to become a better person to escape the loop.
No, he needs to become a better killer.
A much better killer. And the scientific explanation, the contact with the alien's temporal field, That's central. It transforms the temporal reset into an instant training mechanism.
So if Groundhog Day was about moral muscle memory, Edge of Tomorrow is about literal muscle memory. Cage accrues skill at this impossible exponential rate, measured only in successful resets.
But there's a dark side to that.
There is this accelerated evolution.
Well, the identity of Cage becomes fragile. Every time he dies, he retains the knowledge, sure, but the trauma of death is erased, or at least it gets muted.
So he's losing the emotional history of hundreds of failures.
Exactly. The film presents the loop not just as a training montage, but as a kind of dehumanization that's required for survival. He becomes a perfect soldier, but at the cost of continuous personal erasure.
And that fragility of identity brings us directly to source code.
Yes, from 2011.
Which complicates the identity crisis even further by bringing in this concept of accessing alternate realities through memory reconstruction.
Source code is such a fascinating structural puzzle. The core mechanism is accessing the source code. This sophisticated digital or psychic echo built from a dead person's residual memory stream.
Just from the last 8 minutes of their life.
Just the last 8 minutes.
Yeah.
And the protagonist, Coulter Stevens, his job is to identify a bomber within that limited repeating temporal window.
The philosophical question here is huge, right? Is he truly traveling, or is he just occupying an incredibly detailed, perfect simulation? The film is always pushing at that boundary.
And that's the genius of it. If the reality he's entering is just a reconstruction, then his ability to change events in those 8 minutes, saving the people on the train, that should be totally meaningless to the real world.
But it's not.
It's not. The film gives us that critical, unexpected ending where, by pushing the boundaries of the source code, he seems to create and then jump into a brand new, actual, non-fatal timeline.
That changes everything. Because if he can rewrite the end of that 8 minutes and then communicate with his real-world handlers from this new reality...
It suggests the source code is less a simulation and more a gateway.
Exactly. It asks us, the viewer, if your consciousness is transferred into an 8-minute echo and you manage to make that echo continuous, are you still the same person?
Or have you essentially performed an identity transplant into an unforeseen parallel universe? It's the ultimate metaphysical escape clause, but it's framed by hard science fiction.
A man living on borrowed, digitized time.
Desperately seeking meaning in a fractured existence.
Okay, so we've covered the loops. We've gone from moral necessity to accelerated mastery and identity displacement. Now we have to transition into the heaviest territory.
The really heavy stuff.
Pure time travel mechanics, paradoxes, and the kind of intellectual challenges that actively resist a simple explanation. We're moving away from the short, contained reset button.
And into the utterly mangled world of physical temporal jumps, where cause and effect are just a mess. This is where the rules of physics, not just ethics, are fundamentally challenged.
And to start that conversation, we have to look at Looper.
From 2012. Yes. While it uses traditional time travel sending victims back 30 years, its whole premise is built on exploring the causal paradox in the most brutal way imaginable.
The premise is so simple but horrific. Younger Andrassans have to kill their older selves to close the loop.
And the whole narrative complexity just hinges on that one confrontation. Young Joe versus old Joe.
Looper is defined by the absolute messiness of its causality chains. When young Joe has to eliminate his future, the film uses that horrible physical manifestation to make the abstract grandfather paradox feel tactile.
It makes it real. We see graphically what happens to the older self when the younger self is mutilated or marked.
Oh, that scene is crucial, where young Joe starts carving messages into his own arm.
And those scars instantly appear on old Joe's face and body. The film doesn't hide from the consequences. It makes the paradox a form of bodily horror.
It's arguing that even if the timeline is resistant to total collapse, that physical connection between past and future self is agonizingly immediate and unbreakable.
It forces the viewer to think about paradox not as some distant theoretical threat, but as an immediate, painful consequence of nonlinear existence.
And if Looper offers this visceral, painful paradox, our final film, well, it offers the ultimate intellectual headache.
We have to present Primer from 2004 as the densest, most difficult text in the entire genre.
No question.
What's so fascinating here is that Primer treats time travel like an engineering problem that just spirals out of control almost immediately.
And its appeal is its difficulty, right? It refuses to hold the audience's hand.
Absolutely. The film is built entirely on the scientific illiteracy of the viewer being overwhelmed by the fictional technical jargon.
You hear words like drift, error correction, and box placement. For the film analyst trying to parse that dense dialogue, what are those concepts really about? Why are they so confusing?
They're just terms of temporal logistics. Drift is temporal displacement error, the time difference between when you enter the machine and when you arrive, which isn't exact.
Okay.
The box they build is a crude, one-way time machine, and the characters realize right away that every trip creates a new version of themselves. So box placement becomes a question of existential math.
How many copies of me are running around in this specific 24-hour window?
And what are their intentions?
So the confusion comes from the fact that the protagonists themselves are struggling to control a system they only half understand,
Leading to a proliferation of alternate selves whose actions and motives quickly become untraceable, contradictory. It's a fractal of paranoia.
Exactly. The film serves as a primary text for understanding the technical complexity of the genre because it forces the audience to engage in active, intense deconstruction of the plot, not just passive viewing.
It argues that true time travel wouldn't be glorious or cinematic. It would be confusing, logistics heavy, and probably disastrous because of error proliferation.
The genius of Primer is that it makes you, the viewer, feel just as lost and overwhelmed as the characters are. The ambiguity is baked into the physics of their flawed machine.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, we've covered an extraordinary spectrum today. We've defined the genre through these 5 lenses. We started with the tight, self-contained loops for moral evolution in Groundhog Day, the spiritual escape.
Then we move to the pragmatic loops. Mastery and the severe identity crises from simulated and alternate realities in Edge of Tomorrow and Source Code.
And finally, we untangled the frightening intellectual and physical challenges of causal paradoxes in Looper and the sheer technical density and narrative ambiguity of Primer.
The common thread, though, regardless of the mechanism, is that breaking linear time always forces this profound, often painful internal change.
Always. Whether the challenge is ethical, mechanical, or purely philosophical, the protagonists have to fundamentally grapple with who they were, who they are, and who they could be when consequence itself is mutable.
So what does this all mean? I mean, these films are more than just genre exercises. They're thought experiments. They challenge our most fundamental belief that life is a straight line.
They force us to consider destiny, free will, the very definition of a meaningful life. If the opportunity arose to stop time's progression, would you accept the terms?
And that leads us to our final thought for you. The person who has now mastered the concepts of causality and paradox. Considering the specific, intense challenges these characters faced, the scientific density, the emotional tests, the ultimate crises of identity, which specific loop or temporal mechanism would you choose to be trapped in?
The one requiring perfect moral goodness. The one demanding hyper-accelerated skill mastery.
Or the one that simply ends when you solve the riddle of your own existence?
Until the timeline resets again.
Dive